Welcome back for another episode. Today we have Joey Stuckey with us, all the way from Macon, Georgia. Macon Bacon, their baseball team.
That's right.
And you're a man of many talents, Joey. Do you want to start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself, your eye condition, and well, why we've chosen you for the podcast today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the important thing to know when we talk about all the things that I do and we kind of discuss how that works as a blind person. I had a brain tumor when I was 18 months old, and that's what took my eyesight and sense of smell as well. So I'm down two. I'm down
Wow.
two senses, but I use that like I do everything else in my life. I use it to my advantage, and that's how I tricked my wife into marriage. Because
She
I
couldn't
told her,
smell
I
you?
said, no, I said, no matter what you do, sweetheart, you will never look or smell bad. And she said, I will take that. So it works. So the brain tumor was not cancerous, so the chance of it coming back is pretty rare. And this, I'm in my 40s now, and so this is when I was 18 months old. But it did take some other stuff as well. So it was growing at such an exponential rate, it sort of crushed some wiring inside the old brain. And so I don't have a lot of glandular functions like adrenal glands and things like that. I don't have that or thyroid or anything like that. And so being blind is definitely a challenge. But on top of that, I have to manage all the other things that the brain tumor did. So I take a bunch of probably about 30 pills a day, a shot a day, and stuff like that to kind of manage these other sort of chronic conditions that the brain tumor gave me. And the hardest one is really, is the adrenaline thing. So if I get tired, my body doesn't make more adrenaline. I have to find other ways to cope with that. And so I manage my time very carefully. I'm not a sick person, but I do have to just take care of myself. I have to drink a lot of fluids, stay hydrated, all this kind of fun stuff. And in the music business, that can be a real challenge because people expect you to work 14 hours a day, and that's not healthy for anybody, by the way. But
Yeah.
that's something that I have to manage very carefully. So I am totally blind. I do have some light perception in my left eye, the upper, to get uber technical, because I think we can go down the rabbit hole on this podcast. A lot of times I'll just say I'm totally blind and leave it at that because describing the light perception is such a finicky detail and it's hard to really understand and make sense of. But the upper left 16th quadrant of my left eye has some light perception. So, I can typically tell the difference between noontime and midnight if I'm outside, that kind of thing. But no usable vision of any kind. I can't use it for navigation, can't use it for reading, anything like that. So that's basically my eye condition. So I'm really ears and hands. I mean that's pretty
Yeah.
much what I got to work with.
Oh, well, thanks for sharing, Joey.
Yeah.
You touched on there about the music side of things, and you are with us for your musical prowess. So, how did you get into music? Like, at what age did you decide this is the career for me?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, again, as I said, the brain tumor made me really sick as a child. So, my early childhood was just focused on survival. I was in intensive care for about 4 months after the brain tumor surgery. And then I had a lot of episodes where I was sick on and off again, spent a lot of time in the hospital. So, initially I just fought to be healthy and be alive. And then, just to get through the basic schooling. I never went to a blind school or anything like that, primarily because there really wasn't that resource available to me. But the other thing was that my parents wanted me to, stay with the understanding that it is a sighted world out there, and you need to be able to cope with that. So there was that sort of idea in the background as well. But by the time I was 13, I had pneumonia really, really, really bad, and it almost killed me. I almost died a couple of times as a child, and I was in the house for about 3 months straight over the summer holiday period from school, and I discovered something that you in the UK still have and still value today, even today, but something that for us was old and sort of novel, and that was radio plays.
Right.
And so I was listening to back in the 40s and 50s in America, there were lots and lots of radio plays. But once TV came along, the radio plays went way down. I mean, to almost non-existent. There were a handful that were made in the 70s and 80s and even the 90s, but they were very few and far between. So I discovered these old time radio shows from the 50s and 60s and stuff like that. And so it was a watershed moment for me when I realized that my obsession for sound, which is the primary way that I experience the universe, was actually something that I could maybe do. And it was, these radio plays, as you know, are told with dialogue, music, and sound effects. And so I became obsessed with the idea of these sound effects and recording music and recording dialogue. And so by the time, to kind of skip forward a little bit, by the time I was 15, I had my first job as a sound technician for a planetarium here in my hometown. And
awesome.
from that, yeah, it's kind of interesting. So from that, it's a long answer to your question. But from that, there were people. I was the youngest person at the planetarium, at the museum. But people that were 18, 19, 20 years old had little local bands, what we call garage bands, here in the States. And they said, "Hey, we understand you have some recording equipment. Can we come to your home and record our band?" And I said, "Oh, sure, absolutely." And so I started my recording studio at that time. And then when I was about 17, I heard a band come into my little home studio to record. And I had a very encyclopedic knowledge of music. I still do. I mean, I still know a lot of stuff. I'm not all knowing, but I know a lot. And this band came in and played a song, and I didn't know it. And most of the bands to this point had played, record copy tunes or cover tunes of other artists that they were just, mimicking or whatever. And that's kind of how you usually get started. And so I was surprised that I didn't know the song. And I said, "Man, this is a great song, but I don't know it. Who is it?" And they said, "Oh, we wrote that." And that was the other sort of, paradigm shifting moment for me when I realized that I wanted to write and record my own music, and that I had something to say, I had a story to tell, and music was the vehicle through which I was going to share that story. Music had always been very important in my household. Both my parents were amateur musicians, but I really, until I was about 17, really didn't have the help or the time to focus on that aspect. So that's when I really got serious about it and got into the music business. So yeah, that's where it all started. And I've never done anything else since that moment. I've never had the only other job I've ever had outside of music or audio recording, and I've always worked for myself, except for the planetarium job. The only other job I ever had was I taught English for a brief period of time to some ladies from Japan her husbands worked for a company in town, and there were a lot of executives that were from Japan. And so I taught English for a brief period of time. And that's the only job I've ever had outside of music or audio. And even that's kind of related because it was language, which is, auditory thing. So.
Yeah.
So you just got to bear with me a little bit. I've got a bit of a cough at the moment. And I'm going to edit all of that out. I just didn't want to do it while she was speaking. Apologies.
Oh, no problem, my friend. I hope you feel better.
Yeah, thanks. So you mentioned the recording at quite an early age. How did you get hold of these sort of old recording equipment? And also, how did you find it from a person, like as a perspective from a person that couldn't see? Was it particularly tactile? Was it easy to get the hang of?
Yeah, that's a great question because, analog recording is in many ways more accessible than digital recording. And obviously analog has its drawbacks. We can, if you ever want to get a bunch of audio engineers in a room and start a fist fight, what you can do is say, "Hey, you like analog or digital better?" and a rumble will commence. But there are certainly arguments for both aspects of that technology. But back when the stuff I had was, compared to what I do now, was, a joke. But it was good enough. And so I started off with just a little tape deck, just a little personal tape recorder with one mono microphone in it. And what I did was I learned one of the key techniques, because I kind of had to, because the equipment was so primitive. I learned one of the basics that I still teach to my students today, which is microphone placement. That really is the key to any great sound, choosing the right microphone for the job, which I didn't have much of a choice at the time. But choosing the right microphone for the job and then figuring out where to place it to capture the tone and the sound that you want. So when I recorded all my sound effects, at first it was just this little handheld tape recorder, which was okay to for a child's curiosity when I was like, younger. But then, like I said, when I was 13 and I got real serious about it, I realized that maybe it's something I could do in a real professional way. I convinced my parents to buy me some very primitive equipment at a local electronics store. And I had 2 tabletop microphones and a little 3-channel mixer and a little stereo cassette deck. And I carried that stuff with me everywhere. It was pretty cumbersome, but I had it wherever I went if they would allow it. And so I remember, like, as a child, going to the beach for a holiday and, just having those microphones and stuff. And I'd fix them all up in a bag. And I heard somebody, I was trying to record good ocean surf recording, which with the equipment I had, because of the wind and all that kind of stuff, I never could get a really good ocean surf recording with that primitive stuff. But there was a guy working on his boat. He was planing his boat using a planer, like a little saw. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And I got a pretty good recording of that. But yeah, the analog technology, I mean, once you memorize the buttons and where they were and what they did, and you memorized all the jacks where you plugged in the microphones, and okay, this one goes here, this one's a headphone, this one's a microphone, this one's a line. The analog technology was really very accessible. The only thing that you really couldn't do as a blind person back there was read your tape counter, which told you, how far into the tape you had gone. So if you set your tape counter to 0 and you were working with a 60-minute tape, you couldn't go back and reference, oh, this is where I am and this is where I need to be. So you had to listen to everything. You couldn't sort of skim around and skip back and forth. So that was the only major limitation. The other limitation, of course, would be the metering of there's this concept called signal to noise ratio, which means that by virtue of something being electronic, it has system noise, and you always want your audio level to be higher than the system noise floor, but lower than the peak threshold, which is where the noise starts to distort. So, you couldn't really see the meters to help you with that. But, if you've got a good set of ears, you can kind of tell. It won't be perfect, but it'll be close. You can kind of tell where that floor is just by listening. It's a little faster if you can see, but it's not, it's never been a problem for me. I've had lots of people say, oh, you can't read all the meters and dials. How can you possibly do audio? But the good news is, audio is consumed not by the eye, but by the ear. So ultimately, the most important faculty is the ear.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I've done some primitive stuff in my day, and it was all digital. But it was at a specialist blind college, and it was all accessible in the sense that they were very much just listen. It's like, record, play it back, and then it's like, does it sound too high? Is the treble fine? Is the bass fine? Is the microphone placement fine? Now reset and start again. And then after 15 minutes, you nailed it and you knew exactly what was going on. And we didn't once look at a meter on any sort of mixer, not once.
That's right. I mean, and then that's the thing. I mean, it's a little faster if you can see, but I mean, it certainly can be done if you can just hear. And I worked with Queen Mary in the digital domain, talking about computer space. I was part of the project with Queen Mary that came up with the accessible peak meter plugin, and that was a great tool. The only problem is that you're now one of the problems, and we won't go down this rabbit hole too far unless you tell me that you want to. But one of the problems with the digital technology of working inside the computer, inside the DAW, the DAW, which stands for Digital Audio Workstation. One of the problems with that is that most of the everything's visual. You're clicking on the screen, you're looking at graphs and charts and meters. And so obviously what you have to do is use some scripting so that you can use something called a screen reader that tells you kind of what's going on verbally. Then you have the music or the audio you're trying to listen to while the screen reader is talking in your ear. And then if you use the audio peak meter, you've got this other bing going off, this other like tone going off. So you're really bombarding your ears and asking it to do the job of other senses. So it becomes very cumbersome, which is one of the reasons that I think one of the few ways in which AI can really be useful is for it to become sort of a virtual assistant for the blind audio professional to help take some of the burden off the ear. Because I'm trying to listen to the music. Well, if I've got 10 or 15 instruments going on, then at the same time, I'm having to listen to the computer talk to me and tell me what's going on the screen. Then if I've got the audio peak meter, I'm listening to that tone. That's a lot to process with just one sense. I mean, I do it, but it's a lot to ask.
Yeah, that's insane. So if we move on a little bit then to your actual music career, when was it you sort of picked up a guitar, when you started writing your own songs?
Yeah, so my dad had played guitar. He's actually hearing impaired. He's totally deaf without his hearing aid. And he had played guitar, my whole life as a country and Western, player. And so there were guitars laying around the house, but I never really picked it up until I was about 17 when I heard that music. I was like, yeah, I want to play. Before that, I had kind of taught myself piano, but it was good enough to kind of mess around, but not great. I'm still not a very good piano player. Everybody thinks when you're blind, you're a piano player because of like Stevie Wonder, Ray Charles, and everybody's like, "Oh, will you come play piano?" No, I will not. You don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. It's like because I'm a guitar player. So. But I finally decided to get serious about it and get involved and actually make it something I understood at a profound level when I was 17 and I heard that band play that original song that I didn't know. And then I realized, well, if they can do it, there's no reason I can't do it. And so that's when I got really into it and started writing songs. And because, teenage years are difficult. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of things, that are difficult about those years. If you're blind, you can't drive like your friends. Now I know in the UK, it's a little different because you guys have such wonderful public transportation. But here in the States, our public transportation is abysmal by comparison. And because here in the States, I can get from one end of the UK to the other in about six hours. But here, I couldn't travel from one end of my state to the other in 6 hours here. Yeah. And so everything is spread so far apart, you really kind of need a car. And so not being able to drive as a teenager was tricky. Trying to meet girls was really tricky. Trying to figure that out because I can't walk up to somebody and just walk up and say hello. So all that stuff was, and then of course there was, other parts of my journey about, being blind and all that kind of stuff. And so I really had some things that I wanted to say. I felt the real need to express myself and to take all these emotions that I felt and some of the frustrations, but also some of the triumphs as well. The fact that I had survived the brain tumor and all these other things. So I had a lot of things I wanted to say and a lot of things I wanted to explore. And so that's why I really wanted to get serious. So my first album came out when I was I can't remember exactly how old I was, but I was between 20 and 21. My first album came out. And that was when I really, it took me a couple of years to get proficient enough at the guitar and singing and playing. I also play bass. And so proficient enough and to play in a few bands and to really get that going. It takes a handful of years for any new proposition to bear fruit. So that's kind of what it all started. But once I got started with that first record, that was that. By the time I was 19 years old, I had a recording studio in the city center of my hometown and was recording other bands, as a living. But I didn't put my first record out, so I was about between 20 and 21. I can't remember exactly the year, but it was that because it took me a while to find the right people to play with. I always have played with older musicians. Like when I was in my 20s, I was playing with guys in their 40s, and I just nobody else really could give me what I wanted. I became a producer. Interestingly, the first band that I was really in and was serious about, where I started writing a lot of the songs and all that kind of stuff, I realized that I had a talent of writing parts. Well, here's the bass line, here's what the drums do, and here's what the keyboard does, and here's what the guitars do, and here's what the vocals do. And that really has stood me in good stead as a producer, because the guys in my band were talented. When I was playing with people my own age, it's not that they weren't talented, but music for them was a hobby. Whereas for me, it was like everything. I was obsessed with it. I still am obsessed with it. And I was obsessed with it. It's the only thing I really wanted to do with my life. And they were kind of lazy and didn't learn their parts. So I would take the songs that we wanted to learn and I would assign the parts. All right, this is your part, I'd play it. And this is your part, and I'd play it. And this is your part. And so that has become, a very important talent as a producer, because you get in there and say, okay, well, here's what the horns are going to do. And here's what, you can get in there and really orchestrate things. So by virtue of necessity, I became a really good producer because my bandmates were lazy. so it actually paid dividends. At the time, I was highly frustrated when I was, 18, 19 years old. But honestly, it's the best thing that could have possibly happened to me.
Did you record your own albums?
Yeah, I did. I recorded some demos. When I was 18, 19, I recorded some demos. But then, but I was so busy working for other people, and this is one of the problems with being a producer and a recording engineer. It's hard to really make a lot of money as an artist. You hear the term starving artist all the time, and it's really true. It's really hard to make a living as an artist. And so, I was making a living working for other artists, like helping them bring their vision, to life. And so, but I did start recording my album when I was around 19 or 20. And I've always recorded my own albums. In 2019, we did a record with the band that I put together. Over the years, I've had lots of various incarnations of my own band. I'm a solo artist since I've been in my 20s. I decided that being in bands was something I wasn't going to do because there was always one or two guys that did all the work. And I thought, well, if I'm doing all the work anyway, I might as well be a solo artist and call the shots. And because I was the only person serious about it. So I was the one, doing all the work. So, well, I might as well be in charge and just do all that. So anyway, but I've had lots of different incarnations in my band. But in 2019, we were on tour a lot, and we performed all up and down the East Coast, and ended up our last date of that tour. We ended up performing to a packed house at the world famous Whiskey a Go Go in LA, which was a real thrill to be there. And so during that year, we had gone through Memphis, Tennessee, which is a real music mecca. There was a recording studio there from the 60s called Sun Studio.
Yeah.
And that's where Elvis and Roy Orbison and Jerry Lee Lewis and Carl Perkins recorded a lot of their important records, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And so we just stopped in the studio for a couple of hours just for fun, and recorded back. I mean, they're still recording the same way they did back then. And no disrespect to the people that are engineers there, but basically, they don't know how to do anything except put you on the X where Elvis stood to sing. Like, okay, this is where the drums have always been. This is where the guitars have always been. This is where the singers have always stood. And, the only sort of nod to the current, music industry is that they're recording in Pro Tools as opposed to analog tape. But otherwise, you're still using amps from the 60s and 70s. You're still using microphones from the 60s and 70s, which is great. It's a lot of fun. But we were all recording in one room, pretty small room. And one of the problems with that is that every instrument gets on everybody else's microphone. So if you try to fix something, you got drums bleeding into the vocal mic, you got bass bleeding in the guitar mic, you got, so we couldn't really fix anything. We had to just do a take and hope that it was good. So when I got it home to mix at my studio, I was surprised at how much I enjoyed the raw energy of the tracks. I was like, yeah, let's finish this up and put it out. So anyway, the reason I'm saying all that is to say that that is the only time I've recorded at somebody else's studio. Otherwise, I've always done my own stuff. But we were on tour, and we did it just for fun. I didn't know that it was going to be a record. We just did it kind of as a souvenir of our time together on the road, because I had the band sounded the way I wanted it, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice to commemorate that? And, you know, you could the studio is a museum from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then from 7 to 10 p.m., you can rent the studio to track. So you got 3 hours, and that includes setup time. And so, you know, that's pretty fast. And so, but we got a whole record done in 3 hours and had a blast, and then ended up making it into an album and putting it out. And it was a lot of fun. But yeah, normally I record all my own stuff as the producer and the engineer and the artist.
So you mentioned playing live there as well. What's it like playing live as a person without any sort of usable sight?
Well, Ronnie Millsap, who's a blind keyboard player and had some hits here in the States and probably, I guess, all over in the 80s as a blind, piano player. I understand he does some limited stage movement. He moves around the stage a little bit. But I don't. So the only real concession, to being blind on stage is that I just don't walk around and move around very much. Whereas if I could see, I would probably move around a lot more. Now, one of the problems with moving around if you're a guitar player and you have a bunch of pedals is you can't take the pedals with you. They're on your pedal board. And that's not something that can really move around as you move around. I mean, I guess you could have several pedal boards set up at different places on the stage, but when you're on stage, there's a bunch of cables running everywhere and a bunch of stuff everywhere, and every night's a different stage. There really isn't a safe or easy way for me to move around much. So I used to stand when I was younger. I used to stand and move around a little bit in my little spot, but I now have a metal shoulder and a metal hip. I'm pretty young to have those things. I got the metal hip when I was 28 as a latent issue from the brain tumor that I was not expecting. I got the metal shoulder in 2018, which was, again, a big surprise. So I really don't want to fall at this point. And so I've decided to set my butt down and not move. So I stay seated. But if I say so myself, I mean, I have a pretty good presence on stage. So I don't really need to move around, because the live show is about, 25%, 30% me telling stories and laughing and cutting up and having a good time. And then the rest is all music. So, I don't really think I need it. I mean, it's not like a Taylor Swift concert where she's coming down on a zip line and, all these. I'm totally jealous that she can do all that. I think that's great. But I don't think it's essential. I mean, when you go to a concert like that, she's one of the biggest artists in the world, and you're getting a lot more than just music. You're getting a real entertainment package. And there's a difference in my mind between like a musical artist and like an entertainer. And there's some differences there. And I entertain in very auditory ways as opposed to very physical ways. So there's less physicality in my show, but there's plenty of entertainment and musical value, I think.
That's awesome. And of course, getting yourself into the music, start hitting the road, you solved the problem of like not being able to drive because you've got band members, and now chicks are going to come to you because what girl doesn't like the rock star? You know what I mean?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I had a wonderful. So I've been married 20 years now, and when I met my wife, I was actually in a wheelchair as well, and I thought, oh gosh, do I want to meet a new woman now? I'm blind. That's strike one. I'm in a wheelchair. That's strike two. And I'm a musician. That's strike three. But anyway, I ended up going on and all my dates are technically blind dates, haha. But this really was a friend of ours set us up, and then we ended up the worst. I said, man, what's the worst thing that could happen? And so we've been married like 21 years as of this June. So it worked out. But I have had some pretty funny things. Yeah, the guitar when I was younger, the guitar brought girls to me. I didn't have to go find them. They came up to talk to me. And I can tell you that was a big selling point of the guitar. I was like, this is a great idea. It brought not just ladies that were interested in flirting, but it brought a lot of people to me. And that was really important because it was hard for me to get around and go meet people. And obviously now, I have employees, I have bandmates, I have my wife. So I have solved the problem of driving. It's still a little bit of a problem, but we have Uber as well, so Uber's pretty good for the blind. It is still, as I say, it's still a bit of a problem, driving, and like the other day, my wife was sick, and I had a concert about an hour and a half away from where I live, and I had to sort of scramble and figure out, okay, I got to get there. Who can get me there? And so I had to sort of scramble and figure that out. It was on a weekend. And, it was difficult, but I made it work. And, I've never had to cancel a show date because of something like that. But, it's been close a few times. So there is that difficulty. And not being able to pick up anything you want and just read it, can be annoying as well. But nowadays, you're right. I mean, I've been able to solve most of those problems, at least most of the time. But I will tell you a quick funny story that we were playing. I don't know if you know the artist Steve Miller, but the Steve Miller Band has a great song called "The Joker," and there's a line in "The Joker" that I think is particularly funny, and it says, "I really love your peaches, want to shake your tree." Yeah. And I always smile really big when I sing that line because it amuses me. And one night before I was married in the dark days, I sang that line. A young lady thought I was singing it to her because she thought I was smiling at her. But of course, I had no idea that she was even there. And so then she started provocatively dancing for me and basically telling me through her movements that she was available to take home. But I didn't know any of that. And so we played a few more songs and then we took a break and she came over. She's like, "Who the hell do you think you are?" And was like really mad. And I was like, whoa, what's going on? And she's like, "Man, I was dancing for you and you smiled at me and then you just blew me off and didn't even respond." I was like, "Baby, I'm blind. I don't know what you're talking about." She's like, "Oh, yeah, sure, whatever." She totally didn't believe it. And my friend was standing there and was like, no, he really is blind. She's like, "Oh, yeah, sure, whatever." And she was really mad that I had blown her off and thought that I was not looking at her and all that, wasn't responding to her flirtation. But I totally had no clue that was happening at all. So, silly. And I've said things that have got me in trouble before the show. I said one time, this is a song that's going to make you want to throw your underwear. And I was just said something stupid because that's what I do. And when they took the brain tumor out, they took out the old brain-mouth barrier. So I just sort of talk and hope for the best. And so this lady goes, "What if you're not wearing any?" And got up on a chair and exposed herself. And of course, I didn't know this, right? The band all starts laughing like uproariously. And I thought, oh, yeah, I'm kind of funny, But actually, it was the fact that this woman, and I heard her say, "What if you're not wearing any?" But I didn't know that she decided to reveal to the world that was, in fact, not a problem that she had. She, in fact, had no underwear to throw because she wasn't wearing it. Anyway, when you play in pubs and bars, sometimes you get that kind of reaction from time to time.
And in terms of bands that you've played with, you mentioned Steve Miller there, but I also have read elsewhere the likes of James Brown, Smashmouth, and various others that you've shared stages with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So James Brown was a lot of fun. I mean, he's from Georgia, which is where I was born in Jacksonville, Florida, and Green Cove Springs, Florida, but I've lived here in Macon, Georgia since I was 15. So James Brown is from Augusta, Georgia, which is a couple hours away, but he's been a big presence in Georgia and is rightly so, called the Godfather of soul. Yeah. And an incredible talent. He's passed away, many years now, but we got a chance to open for him and to be his opening act, and it was a lot of fun. And actually, his keyboard player. Well, I don't know if you've ever done this, but when you're opening for a bigger act, what happens is you have to set up your equipment in front of theirs. So they get on the stage first, they set up and sound check and get all their stuff positioned right where they want it. And then you have to just sort of fit in wherever there's a space. Yeah. And so you just kind of have to fit in, wherever there's a space, and then you play your stuff, then you break your stuff down real quick so they can get on stage. You got about 15 minutes to get off stage, to pack up all your stuff and get out of their way. So anyway, we were up there, and during our set, the keyboard player had left something on stage that he apparently had to have. And so he came out while we were playing, and I don't know if he was, there was a lot of rumors that James Brown's band were always high. They were always on drugs or drinking or whatever. And I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but whatever the reason, the guy, when he left the stage, tripped on the power cord and unplugged the whole stage.
Oh, no.
And so and the sound man's like, you guys might as well stop playing. I was like, no, we don't stop playing. We just keep on. So when they finally plugged everything back in, we were right where we were supposed to be. We were still, even though we couldn't hear each other anymore except for the drums, we were still kind of where we were supposed to be. I was like, I don't stop playing unless there's a fire. In that case, we'll leave. But otherwise, we're like the guys of the Titanic. We just keep playing. But it was a really weird experience. I mean, but I played with Ted Nugent, Bad Company, Smashmouth, Trisha Yearwood, B-52s, Lee Brice, and then from the jazz world, people like Sammy Nestico and Alan Mazzuti and a lot of the guys that played with Chick Corea. And then I've done a lot of recording sessions with other people. I've done recording sessions with some of the members of REM and stuff like that. So yeah, I've had a good career, and I've worked with some celebrities, which is awesome. But and I still want to do more of that. So don't get me wrong. But really, I think with the celebrity thing, when someone who's higher up the food chain than you recognizes your talent and says, you could be part of what I'm doing, I could use your talent, that's a real thrill. But the thing that I really value even more than that is working with unknown artists who have very limited experience in the studio, because I want to give them a great experience, and I want to give them more than they've paid for, so that they can take what we've done together and really advance their career. And I take a lot of pleasure in doing that and being able to start them off on a good path. And I can't tell you how many artists I've worked with before who hate coming in the studio because they had a really bad experience. And so I keep it light. I make a lot of stupid jokes, and I keep it light and entertaining, and we get a lot of work done. And I'm not a prude. I don't care if you drink or smoke, or it doesn't matter to me. But not while we're recording, because the only thing that I want is a record. The thing that I really care about is making records. And if we're going to make a great record, I need you to be focused. I need you to be at the top of your game. And you can do anything you want on your time. And I don't care. I'm not judging you. But when we're making records, we're making records. So, and that's actually kind of the reason, right before he died, Greg Allman from the Allman Brothers was supposed to come record all his vocals with me, because I run that kind of studio and I don't let things get out of hand. And sadly, he passed away before he was able to come down and do it. And they actually released his last album with what we call his scratch vocals. That means they were just placeholders. They weren't his best vocal. He just sang so the band knew where they were and they had a reference. But it was just a reference track or a scratch track. And of course, they released it with the scratch vocals, which, in one sense is good because he was able to do a farewell album to his fans. But in one sense was not as good because it wasn't the record he wanted to leave with. It wasn't his best. It wasn't his best work. So I feel real conflicted about that. Like, part of me goes, yeah, I get it. It's better to have an album of Greg, as a farewell. But then part of me feels like, well, but it's not the record he would have necessarily wanted. But anyway, because I'm, all about making records and there are no other distractions. That's the reason that he was going to come record with me. Not that, that was the primary reason, because I run a real tight ship, even though we have a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, I think unfortunately we're going to have to start bringing this to a close, just because we are short on time. However, for those looking to get into the industry, maybe with a visual impairment or maybe some other sort of disability, what sort of advice would you have for them if they were starting out?
Yeah, I think the first thing that you have to have is a true passion. Excuse me. I think the first thing you have to have is a true passion, because that passion, that drive, is going to give you the strength to put up with all the disappointments and all the heartache and all the things you have to overcome. But it can be done because I've done it. And if, there are one of the things I'm really passionate about, I'm building a new studio space right now. It's 9,000 square feet of studio space. And one of the things that I'm doing, I'm building a big room that can accommodate like a 60-piece orchestra, and that's really exciting. But the thing that I'm most excited about is I'm taking my time. It won't be done till around this time, 2025. But the thing I'm most excited about is I'm spending as much time as I can to make this a mecca for disabled musicians to come and learn their craft. And we are taking into account hearing disabilities, mobility disabilities, visual disability, any and all of these things that we can think of, neurodivergent issues, having a space where you can go and relax for a few minutes if you're feeling overwhelmed. So there's all kinds of things we're trying to take into account. Because in the big bad world, when you get out there, you're not going to have everything that you want or need or deserve. But I feel like if I can take away those extra stressors, at least while you're honing your craft, that's going to be a major advantage. But my advice is research as much as you can, talk to people as much as you can, because if we can't talk about what we need, there's no way we can get what we need. And I've found that a lot of people are very interested in assisting if they but know how to do that. Now, a lot of people are not, and will tell you, oh, well, you're blind, get over it. We're not going to help you. I've actually had people literally say that to me when I talk to them about accessibility, which is one of my, I'm a real accessibility advocate. But I don't let that make me angry. I just keep on coming back. And I also come to people with solutions and not problems. So, for example, if I have a problem, right now we're struggling with having access to Dolby Atmos. And instead of coming to them and saying, I can't access Dolby Atmos, fix it, I've come to them and saying, I can't access Dolby Atmos. I've got a few ideas that might be something you could work with to make this issue a little bit better. And I really want blind engineers to be able to do Dolby Atmos because we're used to thinking in 360 sounds all day long. That's our world. And it would be a shame not to be able to. I mean, who better than a blind person to mix in Dolby Atmos? Anyway, my point is, like, just have that strength of conviction, that passion, and then the determination and patience to continue working on the problem. And if you can, think of a solution, even if it's not the final solution or the right solution, try to come to people with solutions along with your requests, because over time, at least they'll feel like you're trying. Because I get it. I mean, I'll leave you with this. I'm a small business owner. I understand that there's a finite amount of money I have to solve any problem in my business. But accessibility is not only the right thing to do from a human perspective and morally correct, but it's also possible to do even with a limited budget. And you can go out and find partners to help you. There's all kinds of things that you can do. There's one guy in the UK, his name's Steve Spamer, and he's the only reason that the blind community have access to a DAW called Samplitude. And it's because Steve Spamer set out and scripted for this. He's never made any money off it. He's just gone out and done it. And he's the reason that we can use that program. And it's that's it. And so he took the time and the patience, and he had the desire to want to be able to use that program. And, obviously there are some hurdles that were difficult to get over, but by and large, it's pretty accessible. So anyway, I think at the end of the day, it's that belief in yourself that you can do it, which, look, sometimes you're going to feel more confident than others. That's normal. but just keep that passion, whatever it is you're trying to pursue. If that's your passion, that passion for the project will sustain you through the hard times, and we'll see you come out on the other side successful.
Amazing. Well, Joey, thank you very much for coming on.
What a pleasure.
If people want to find you, whereabouts can they find you?
I am at all the places you would suspect: Apple Music, Amazon Music, Spotify. I'm also on most of the social media platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. For Instagram and Twitter, it's at the letter J and then Stuckey Music. For Facebook, it's just facebook.com/Joey Stuckey Music. I think on TikTok, it's just Joey Stuckey, all one word. And of course, there's the catch-all, joeystuckey.com, JoeyStuckey.com.
Incredible. Joe, it's been an absolute pleasure. We could talk for hours, but yeah, we have to draw a close, unfortunately. But it's been incredible to have
Well,
you on.
Tony and Eric, it's been my privilege, and I can run my mouth anytime, so we can always pick up again.
Oh, absolutely. Sounds great. Cheers,
All
Joey.
right. Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thanks, friends.
Bye.